Welcome, everyone. I'm Kerry Smith Buck, owner of Construction News and Review, and you are listening to our Build America podcast, the popular national podcast that captures the very heartbeat of construction and development. And that last category is important because with me today, our guest is Patrick McKeehan. He is Director of Economic Development for the city of O'Fallon, Missouri. And Patrick leads a team that engages business enterprises that are seeking to start, locate, or even expand within the city. His role includes articulating the city's resources and serving as pretty dynamic connection, I think, between public and private development partners to make a deal and a project come together. So we have titled the topic of this episode, The Best Strategy for Marketing Your City in 2024, 2025, and beyond. And I want to thank you, Patrick, for coming back on as a repeat guest and for being with us today.
Always a pleasure to spend time with you and talk about the things I love.
It's great, and I know that you do love it. And how long have you been with the city of O'Fallon, Missouri?
It's right at 8.5 years now.
That's awesome. If you love what you do, time does go by quickly. Well, I know for a lot of people, we were talking before we started the episode conversation about some of us may have a rough idea of how things used to come together, where maybe municipalities were on a short list for potential development, and then phone calls were made and confidential meetings were had. But I don't really know this day and age how things work and how, specifically maybe you could share examples of how things work when you all work with developers to bring developments to your city. I'd love to know.
Yeah, there's a couple of different levels there, Kerry, in terms of potentially working with local developers and developers within a region, and maybe we already have some connection or knowledge of them and they of us, versus someone coming completely from out of town, not familiar with the St. Louis region, let alone O'Fallon. And so there's a different kind of educational component to it in terms of telling them who we are and, helping them understand our story. At the same time, throughout my career, it has changed so much in terms of a lot of those developers or site location consultants or whoever we're dealing with do a lot of advanced research. There's a ton of information out there on the internet. They have their own tools that they use to better understand the economy, the workforce, the demographics of your community. And so I don't want to say it's a little bit of a catch-22, but that you have to be very careful when talking with them because they know a lot already. You're assuming that they don't, so you have to be cautious in terms of making sure that your information is correct and it coincides with what they're seeing. But going back to more of that local developer standpoint, we advocate a very strong process of having early conversations, actually sitting down with the developer, maybe the business owner, whoever is involved here, and talking through, okay, what are you wanting to do? Where are you wanting to do it at? What are the alternatives here? What's your timeline? What's your process? What can we do to help you? And it's amazing as to how many compliments we get about that process and in comparison to what they say about other communities. And I always wonder, we haven't really found the magic here. I think it's pretty common sense to have these early conversations, but seems like a lot of communities don't take advantage of that or don't realize how important that is to making this a project a success.
Makes sense, and it does seem like common sense, but how interesting to learn that doesn't automatically happen or that isn't part of it. I know when we talk to construction GCs and specialty folks and designers, they say the earliest you can get to the table, the better. So, yeah, why wouldn't it be true for development as well?
Yeah, where it's a critical piece of in that private sector, those conversations and working and getting that information early and being a part of the team from the very beginning. For some reason, that doesn't get applied in terms of the private sector, public sector relationship. And whereby I think our approach has always been, at least in my time here, that we want to know up front early we may be able to find a way to get this done that you hadn't thought about. We may be able to save you a lot of money because we tell you things up front that you need to be aware of and you can plan for. Or we may even help you make that decision. This is not right. This is not the
Oh,
right time to do this. It's going to be a very difficult decision for our elected officials to approve this. And therefore, you may want to think about this or rethink this plan. So those are
wow.
all possible outcomes, but we're always trying to strive towards everybody coming to yes.
You're like a trusted advisor, really, like a CPA or a lender or someone that just has the credibility to say, maybe this isn't the right time or the right site.
Yeah, and we are very fortunate in the city of O'Fallon that we're not in a desperate situation that we need every kind of development, no matter what and how it happens. But at the same time, I think developers are more trusting and willing to come back if you save them from economic disaster because we couldn't make this happen, but maybe we can make another deal happen.
Sure, I bet. And I bet the network of developers, like you said, maybe locally, regionally, nationally, even nationally, I bet it's a network of sometimes familiar relationships.
Mhm.
So your reputation must be everything.
Yeah, and getting all the right players involved early too. We just don't want to talk to the developer or the business decision maker. We want your engineer and your
Mm.
architect at the table too. If it's a different landowner, we invite them to the table because everybody needs to be able to hear what's being said and then all come to a decision together.
I know it depends based on the type of development project, but we hear on the construction end of things that it's a continually, expectations are high, that the project timeline just seems to be more and more accelerated. And I wondered if that happens to you all with the precursor, the economic
Yeah,
development piece.
I refer to Jay Garner, who's with Garner Economics, and he wrote a book about economic development. And I always struggle trying to understand what our advantage is here and put a finger on it. And I think Jay said it best in terms of it's about certainty, simplicity, and speed. And I realized in reading that's really what we're defining here. Providing some certainty, trying to keep the process as simple as possible so everyone understands it, and then matching the speed and direction of our client, or in a sense, this case, the developer. If they need to get under construction in 6 months, okay, here's what it's going to take to get there. It's going to be really tight. It's going to be a struggle on everybody. But if you truly want to hit a 6 month deadline, we can figure that out. If we have more time available to us, then we can stretch that out and do more up front. But I think that all of those work together, providing some certainty, keeping it simple. And then, like I said, I think time is money, and we understand that, and we're not here to drag this out for months and months and months. We're here to work with you to match your timeline.
That makes a lot of sense. I made a note of that book. I'm going to definitely listen to that.
It's called Economic Development is Not for Amateurs.
Oh, I like that. Very good. Jay Garner. Well, one other question I had, and I don't know when I think about the approval process and city councils and mayors and city managers, and I know it probably this question depends, the answer depends on whether it's a strong mayor structure or a city manager, but when elections happen and maybe seats change on the council, I bet you have to keep a pretty close pulse on that and also on educating, sort of new players within the city, elected or not. So I
Yeah.
wondered, because that could really impact it, I imagine, if you had folks that either didn't understand development or they were just anti-development altogether. How do the elected folks and the managers fit into that, the public part of the
Right.
equation?
Those early meetings that we set up, and we call them build meetings, we actually invite the mayor and the appropriate council members from that area to that meeting. So they're able to, again, hear what the developer or the business has in mind and be able to provide their input. And there's been on occasions when they said, I just don't think I can support this apartment project, or it's going to be pretty hard for me to recommend this project. And it gives them that early indication, but it also keeps them informed from the very beginning and throughout the process So by the time we get months down the road to that vote at the
Mhm.
council level, we feel like we've given them all the right information they need and kept them involved in the process throughout so they can make that decision appropriately. And there's just been rare occasions where we've been surprised by their decision or that there was some uncertainty at that point that made it more controversial. I think that's in part due to the leadership of our mayor, who's been in office for almost a dozen years, stable leadership at the city administrator level. Those all contribute to creating the right environment for development.
That's awesome. That's good to know that those elected officials are certainly at the table early on as well. Let's talk a little bit about the kinds of developments that you attract, maybe manufacturing. I know I've seen some very impressive advanced manufacturing clients. You've helped secure sites and also retail, hospitality. What are the different metrics? I guess in the old days, I'm thinking about when you and I lived and worked in Edwardsville, Illinois, and everybody's like, "When are we gonna get a Trader Joe's? Because we want one." And that wasn't really a metric. Or now they
Right.
have a Chick-fil-A, so that question's gone away. That's what always comes to mind is like if TJ Maxx or someone's coming or Starbucks, their quantifying factors are like traffic counts and stuff. But what do manufacturers look for in terms of making
Mm,
those decisions? And I know that could be like a 3-hour answer, everything's different, but
yeah, from a manufacturing standpoint, definitely one of the key factors has always been workforce. Can they find the workforce, the trained, skilled workforce that they would particularly need? And so that is one of the areas that we are fortunate that, there's enough population, not only in O'Fallon, which is almost 100,000, but in the surrounding area of the county that you can draw a pretty sizable workforce from. They also look at transportation access.
okay.
They look at utility cost. Those are all kind of important factors in terms of manufacturing. And these projects, Carrie, have just grown in terms of the amount of investment. What used to be to get something 30, $40 million of an investment was a pretty amazing number. Now these projects are in the hundreds of millions. And in terms of the advanced technology that it takes to do manufacturing, the investment in the equipment, the type of building and the climate control systems some of them have to have. Some of the things like land cost is such a smaller factor overall. And so, what used to be things about being competitive on land price aren't as important because it's a much smaller percentage of the total project. And so,
Interesting.
so things that we maybe had more concerns about have lessened, and it's all more about some of those other costs that have just really grown.
It makes sense when you're talking about workforce that if it's a lean manufacturing facility, for example, that workforce would be an important piece because versus maybe a retail establishment, like the level of perhaps education, training, the ability to comprise that workforce in that type of development.
Yeah, yeah, it's a fairly high level of cost, and you potentially choke off their ability to grow and reach maximum production if you don't have sufficient workforce to be able to produce the products that they make.
I would think so. I'm sure this is a varied answer as well, depending on the client. But when they come to you, and let's say they're building a $110 million manufacturing plant, do they already have the financing secured, or is some piece of the you're smiling for those of you listening, some piece of the puzzle, is it more they're looking for that too? Or do they have to kind of have that in place before they're even going to have the conversation with O'Fallon?
Yeah, the number you threw out, 110 million. I mean, when you're talking that level, pretty much the financing is kind of already worked out.
Okay.
We recently did a project that was about a 6 million, $7 million project, advanced manufacturing, small company growing. That was an issue. We had to work with our local SBA 504 provider to help work out the financing on that. That influenced some of the things that we were able to do in terms of, from the city's perspective, in terms of assisting this company. But those things are a little more challenging. When you get to that 100 million plus level, most of those companies have the financial wherewithal or access to capital that we don't have to be as concerned about.
That would make sense. So, switching sectors, what would be some of the metrics or the top of the list kind of considerations, resource related, that perhaps a retail? I
Mhm.
know you guys have brought in a number of fast casual restaurants and other retail outlets and things. What are they? Are they primarily looking for how many rooftops, the traffic count?
Yeah,
What are their top items?
we have a primary retail corridor, Highway K, that just by default, that's where most of our retailers want to be. And it's just kind of based upon what you just said. It's surrounding demographics, family incomes, disposable income, but it just as much as it is traffic counts and the visibility to that traffic. So finding a site along Highway K that can meet the needs, new construction, is a little bit of a search in a needle in a haystack. Those sites are just few and far between nowadays, and so it is a little bit of a struggle. We're seeing a couple other areas in our community start to grow, and I think it's just a combination of we can't find space on Highway K. Maybe we target some of these other growth areas, and so we're starting to see some growth there. So for other communities and that are out there pursuing retail development, which is the lifeblood of many cities in terms of its finances, sales tax generation. It's about trying to make sure that you have prime sites with those kind of qualities and characteristics available for your development.
Makes sense. What about, I'm thinking about interest rates recently being lowered 50 basis points and multifamily developments versus single family housing. What are you, oh, he's smiling again. It's going to be a good answer. What are you seeing in and around O'Fallon? Excuse me, with regard to those investments, and what do
Right.
you maybe see changing as we move into 2025?
Yeah, these things kind of come in waves. In 23, 22, 23, kind of post-pandemic years, we saw a significant amount of multifamily development activity across the county, not just in O'Fallon. Our elected officials have been a little bit hesitant about rezoning commercial land or primary single-family residential land for multifamily development because a couple of different reasons. Those developments tend to put more pressure on our infrastructure with higher densities, traffic, city services, emergency services, things like that. And don't bring in the kind of property tax income that a single family development will bring in. And again, from the city's perspective, property taxes are a minor portion of our total revenues, but still important. And so, there tends to be more of a leaning towards the idea. And I think, again, most cities are like this, single family residential development, not so much a transient population that you can find with apartments. But there is still a need, especially as individuals begin to retire, want to stay in the community, want to downsize. You've got to have some diversity of housing available. And so it's finding that right mix. The City of O'Fallon has been very fortunate in that we've had continued to grow as a community in terms of single family residential development. We have somewhere around 2,000 to 2,400 new homes planned in the next 5 years in the city of O'Fallon. We still continue to receive inquiries from developers that want to voluntary annex into the city for new residential developments. So we are definitely fortunate in that way. At some point in time, we're going to run out of land and place to grow into, but that still is growing. And that all contributes to this idea of the need for more commercial development, more job opportunities for those individuals who live here.
Makes sense. I could talk to you all day because this is so interesting. The last kind of portion I wanted to be sure and ask you about, because I think this is definitely an ingredient that sets your city and perhaps others apart, is your identity. I wanted to talk a little about, and I see the logo in back of you
Mhm.
on your desk, but the Selecto Fallon, and how I don't know if a lot of cities are kind of aware or prioritize the importance of having a brand. And I wondered if you could just share with our listeners kind of when that occurred or how that kind of distinguishes you maybe from
Yeah,
cities that don't have that.
yeah. I appreciate the question, Kerry, because this is one of the things I struggle with myself in better understanding brand and how that works. And so 6 years ago, I felt as the economic development director that we truly didn't have, we had a reputation, but I didn't feel like we had a clear brand. And so we came up with the Select O'Fallon as kind of what we consider our brand. And thinking in terms of both select as in exclusive, select as in an action to select O'Fallon, to think about it as a people refer to select athletic teams. This is the cream of the crop. And
Right.
so that's kind of what we were going for in terms of the imagery and also the language. We've been able to build upon that over the last 5, 6 years in terms of positioning us out in the region and the nation at large in terms of this is who we are. And so we have developed a lot of materials, a lot of our marketing strategy and language kind of around that Select O'Fallon brand. It's easy to come up with a slogan or a logo or whatever else. It's how you use that and how you position that. But one of the things that we have done, and I think this is important, and one of the things that you and I worked on years ago together is letting others tell our story. And so our primary marketing goal is to focus on businesses that we have worked with, whether it's a retailer, a developer, advanced manufacturer, and let them tell our story. And within that story, weave in this idea of they select O'Fallon and to tie it all together. And so I think it's been successful. I think we have raised our level of awareness in the region of who we are. I think we have a strong reputation of action and responsiveness that people appreciate. And so it all kind of works together. Just to have a logo and just to have a catchphrase is one thing. You've got to show the action and the work behind it. And I think that's really what O'Fallon has stood for a long time. And we've just been able to bring it all together under this one brand.
That's great. Well, we have been visiting today with Patrick McKeehan, who is Director of Economic Development for the city of O'Fallon, Missouri. And we're just been delighted. I've been delighted to learn from you. Everybody's always selling, right? It's good to know how the relationships of public and private sector come together to kind of cement a deal. But please come back on a third time. We love learning from you.
We can do this every week, Kerry. I'd love to.
Thanks so much, Patrick. And thanks everyone for listening today.
Thank you, Kerry.